welcoming Brendan Malone from LifeNet. Brendan, kia ora, thanks for your time.
Great to be here, Andrew. Good to be on the show with you as always.
Now, first up, I mean, praise God. Honestly, I'm pretty sure that Nigel Latta isn't a person of faith. However, there are people of faith in his circle. I know that people have been praying for him. This is, I mean, even if you don't have a faith, this could be described as a miracle. You have a terminal diagnosis and suddenly it's no longer terminal. Usually this only ends one way.
Well, and it's a beautiful reminder too of how there's an old adage in Christian theology that grace builds on nature. So God's grace builds on nature. And this is a great example that God gives us in the natural sense, the beautiful gift of medicine and medical knowledge and various technologies that can actually aid human flourishing. And it's a reminder when medicine is at its best, it is actually aiding human flourishing and not doing harmful things to human beings. So it's quite a beautiful model of that, really, isn't it?
It certainly is. Now, the other big question that it raises, I suppose, is a terminal diagnosis. This is the last thing that anybody wants to hear about themselves or about a close family member. Nigel Latta, of course, a psychologist, he's made some statements about just how traumatic it was to receive that diagnosis.
Well, yeah, there's a couple of things going on. First of all, his diagnosis with a window of 6 to 12 months meant that last September, at the beginning of September, when he announced that, he absolutely was eligible for euthanasia in New Zealand.
Yeah.
And you think about a situation with someone perhaps who didn't have the same resources around them or who didn't have the same wherewithal, and they might have thought, oh, there's no point. I may as well, try and get out before it gets too difficult.
Yeah.
And sadly, that could have, he might not have been with us if he was a different person. It's interesting, actually, because he talks about when he visited his surgeon, he had another doctor with him as a support person. And I was thinking to myself, good on him for that. But most New Zealanders would not have the ability to have another doctor sitting in the room to guide them through that. They're just, often on their own. And he talked about the traumatic nature of being given that terminal diagnosis. He said, and here's a guy, remember, he's a psychologist, like you said, he specializes in trauma.
Yeah.
And he said this was one of the most traumatic things he's ever experienced in his life. And it got me sort of realizing, if a man like that with that qualification can experience that kind of pressure after receiving a terminal diagnosis, I think in some ways it's a bit naive to say that people can be immune from coercive forces. And imagine what an ordinary person has to grapple with and the coercive pressure that could go on someone to actually prematurely end their life in that situation just because of the shock and the trauma of being diagnosed with a terminal condition.
Now, obviously, Nigel Latta put himself in some pretty stressful situations for our entertainment, with the various TV series that he's done. But I suppose that process, and look, diagnoses need to be given. We need to be, the truth needs to be spoken so that people can make choices about what type of treatment to accept or not accept. That is so important. But actually, it shines a light on the fact that when those words are spoken, it's very difficult to hold on to hope for a lot of people. And without hope, I mean, what else is there?
Yeah, and that's exactly it. And I think one of the great gifts that being a disciple of Christ, I think, gives you is a deep, abiding hope and joy. And joy is more than just pleasure or gratification, obviously.
Yeah.
A genuine sense of happiness and purpose and beyond this life. And there is a great sense of hope that, okay, I can lean into Christ. And even if this is the final days of my life, there is more to come yet.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a sense of, even in the midst of difficulty, like one of the things I think about a lot in regards to this issue is that my death is not simply my own death. I owe this to my family, my community. They need to go on this journey and grow with me through this process as well. They don't experience what I do, but they have to grow through this. And so you're right, without a sense of faith, without something more there, you can imagine what happens to someone. They're literally told, right, you're going to die. And conceivably for a lot of people in our society, Andrew, this is the frightening thing. This might be the first time anyone has ever told them that they will actually die and they've had to confront that reality. I think as Christians, we're often encouraged really to think about our death. That's the history of Christianity. We look to the cross and we recognize that one day we will actually all pass on, and are we ready for that moment?
And of course, what we celebrate in Easter is that death is not the end, and there's a hope that goes beyond death within the Christian faith. I was reading something recently. In fact, I may read this out a little bit later in the program, contrasting this situation with a letter that Pope Francis wrote recently to an Italian newspaper, talking about his experiences going through illness and using that as a lesson of saying, hey, this helps put some things in perspective, and has some things to say about the media and in particular the peace process that's happening in Ukraine at the moment. What a difference faith makes in these end-of-life times, really, particularly in that area of hope and God's purpose and providence.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I think it really is quite profound. You can't understate, I think, how important this all is, because it's not just that sense of, okay, there is something more beyond this life, like you say.
Yeah.
There's also the fact that at the very heart of our Christian faith is a suffering Messiah on a cross. And so we know Christ has actually already been where I've been. He has suffered the ultimate pain and indignity and suffering. And so when God says he knows you and he's with you, he really is. He knows what that means. And there's also that deeper sort of sense of that profound and mystical aspect of communion with others through this journey. And as I said, my sense of my own death is something that I owe to my family. And there's something profound for them in this as well. It's not just an individualistic, solitary pursuit. There is more than just this moment. There is something profound and, yeah, as I said, really quite mystical, even in these sort of very natural processes of like there's a reason why, like in the earlier areas of Christianity, there was a big focus on what they called memento mori, this reminder that you are, you will die, you are dust, and unto dust you will return. And in fact, we think about things like the season of Advent, for example, as we prepare for Christmas in the Christian calendar. And in actual fact, the tradition within Christianity was that every day should be sort of seen as in a sense of Advent. Advent is preparation for the coming of Christ in the stable. But we should see each day as a preparation for our own personal Advent, when Christ one day will call on us and we will die. And have we made our heart a manger, a stable for him to be home in? And are we ready for that Advent of our own? It's quite a profound, beautiful thing.
Whilst a terminal diagnosis can be a traumatic thing, there is, I think, a particular grace with that as well. And I know there'll be people listening to this at the moment who have experienced this, that you get given a timeline, I suppose. You get given that space where you do number your days, where you confront your mortality and you go, okay, this is how much time we have left. For the rest of us, where we don't have the terminal diagnosis, it could be any day now. And so that sense of living each day as if it's our last, because honestly, it could be.
Well, it certainly clarifies things pretty quickly, doesn't it? And I think that what it does, you're right, that it is actually, there is a tradition within Christianity to pray for the grace of a good and happy death. And what's meant by that is not just, that it won't be difficult, but it won't also be unexpected. So you'll have time to actually put right any things, in your life, like wounded relationships with family or friends that are not right and you've been holding off for years maybe. A terminal diagnosis all of a sudden really puts a timeline on all of that and says to us, hey, remember to imitate Christ in everything, because, the moments are now numbered. And
now it seems that whether or not Nigel Latta recognises God may have more things for him to do. And hey, great news in terms of no longer having a terminal diagnosis, but I would encourage people to continue to pray for him. Brendan, just quickly on this one, something else I wanted to touch on, a Netflix series which looks at the topic of adolescence. And Nigel Latta's actually done, I think, quite a series of programs where he's looked at teenagers and how to understand them. This Netflix drama is so much darker. Now, I haven't seen the series. I've just seen the trailer, and that was traumatic enough for me as a parent. Do you think it has some positive things to say? Is it speaking the truth, or is it just a bit sensational and extreme?
Oh, no, it's quite profound. So there's two aspects to this. I mean, it's making international headlines right now. I'm actually going to create a video next week, sort of a bit more of an in-depth breakdown of things, but there's two aspects to it. One is the technical, really phenomenal technical filmmaking prowess on display. There's 4 episodes. They're about 1 hour each in total. So the British know how to do TV well. 4 episodes, that's it. And they're about an hour each. And the gimmick, if you like, is that each episode is one long continuous shot. There is no cuts.
Wow.
And so they follow them through a scene, and then they jump ahead in time the next episode, and they follow them. That's continuous. And I'm someone who loves that style of filmmaking. And I went looking because if you walk through a doorway with a camera, you can hide a cut.
Yeah.
There doesn't appear to be any cuts. It's quite amazing.
Mm.
But the bigger thing is I won't give away any spoilers, but the show is about an adolescent boy, a 13-year-old boy, who is accused of murdering a young girl.
Wow.
And it's based on real events. It's not a true story, but it's based on real events. And what the show is about, it's about the theme of social media and technology. And gosh, it really does hold a mirror up to society. And it's like, what's interesting is they made an interesting decision. They don't actually follow the victim's family. They follow the family of the perpetrator.
Wow.
And it's about their questioning of, did we parent him well? Was I a good enough dad? Did I give him a good role model of masculinity? There's this scene where the mother says, we got him a computer and he was on it day and night, and I walked past his door and I saw the light was on, and I feel guilty. I should have, intervened. There's some really profound questions that they open up here, and it doesn't preach at you. It just opens up the conversation. So very powerful, very, very powerful and important, I think.
Just on that one, Brendan, I know your family are a bit younger. If you had teenagers, if there were adolescents in your household, would you watch this series with them and then have a conversation with them about some of the themes it raises, or is it a little too dark, do you think?
Well, our eldest daughter is about to turn 18, so I'd sit and watch with her quite comfortably. Next down, a 15-year-old twin daughter is probably not quite. There's a little bit of language in there.
Yeah.
So it's just be wary of that. It's very raw. But gosh, if my 18-year-old daughter and I sat down and watched this, or soon to be 18-year-old daughter, there's a lot we could really unpack, because the first episode is just simply the arrest, and we're not sure what's going on.
Yeah.
And then the second one, the police officers go into the school to talk to the friends and try and gather evidence. And there's a lot in that, like the kids with their phones and the way they talk to each other, and they talk about social media and the way they sort of, all of the unhealthy aspects of social media, the way young people can interact with each other if things are not kept in check.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to talk about there. And then by the final episode, it's really about the parents and their sense of guilt, and did we parent well, and what does this mean about us? So there's definitely a lot you can unpack, but not for younger teens, I don't think.
Yeah, no, certainly. But perhaps a teachable moment, and perhaps a wake-up call for parents to say, hey, maybe not to this extreme, but what messages are our children receiving through social media? Let's have some conversations about that. Let's have no surprises, and do whatever we can to ensure that our children grow up within a healthy environment. Brendan, thank you so much for the work that you do at LifeNet. Certainly some food for thought for today. Thanks very much for joining us.
Great to be with you again, Andrew.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe, and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.